Lawn darts weighed over a pound, had steel tips, and landed wherever they pleased. In 1975, you could buy a set at any department store and let your children throw them across the yard with no supervision and no safety warning on the box. Hand a set to a kid today, and you are looking at a product recall, a lawsuit, and a news segment before sundown. The 1970s were full of things like that. Number 14 on this list is a medicine cabinet staple your mother gave you for a headache that now carries a federal warning. Number 38 is a car seat, if you could call it that, with no harness and no crash testing of any kind. And number 51 is a toy that fired hard plastic projectiles directly at your face and sold millions. Here are 60 things from the 1970s that would shock people today. Gas station attendants pumping gas were once as standard as the stations themselves. Drivers never left their cars because uniformed workers would rush out to fill the tank, wash the windshield, check the oil, and sometimes even inflate tires. It was a full-service experience, and attendants were trained to be polite, quick, and thorough. Customers often recognized them by name, especially in small towns where the same worker might serve generations of families. The job could be hot and sweaty in the summer, freezing in the winter, and dangerous given the constant exposure to fuel. But attendants brought a sense of professionalism to every stop, with crisp uniforms and practiced routines. For many teenagers, it was also an entry-level job that provided steady pay. Over time, however, self-service stations spread rapidly because they were cheaper to operate, and by the 1970s, most attendants had vanished except in certain states. Thinking about it now, the idea of being waited on at every fuel stop feels almost unreal. Yet for decades, gas station attendants were a normal part of life, making the simple act of filling a car feel like a small moment of service and care. Station wagons in the 1980s were rolling playgrounds. Children sprawled across the back cargo area like luggage, piled onto each other during road trips, or built forts with pillows and blankets. Seatbelts dangled unused, buried between the cushions. Parents rarely insisted on buckling up, and kids often jumped from seat to seat during the ride. On highways, children slid across the wide vinyl seats as the car turned, shrieking with laughter. For families, road trips were chaotic, noisy, and full of movement. Accidents did happen, but the culture dismissed them as bad luck rather than preventable tragedies. Seatbelt laws were not widely enforced until the late 1980s, so families drove for hours with little thought to safety. Buckling up was for cautious people, not for everyday life. Today, strapping in is second nature, and parents face fines for failing to secure children. Looking back, it is unbelievable how casually families barreled down highways with kids tumbling freely inside the car. Do you remember lying in the back of a station wagon, staring through the rear window at the stars? In the unapologetic. Polyester jumpsuits promised to make fashion easier, but ended up being one of the strangest clothing fads of the 1970s. These shiny, brightly colored one-pieces were marketed as the ultimate convenience. You did not have to match tops and bottoms because it was all one outfit. They looked futuristic and sleek on mannequins, but in reality, they were hot, uncomfortable, and prone to showing every bead of sweat. Still, people embraced them for nights out, discos, and parties, where the glossy fabric reflected the light and added to the spectacle. Men and women alike wore them in bold shades of red, blue, or metallic silver, often paired with oversized collars and chunky belts. The style fit perfectly with the decades' love of daring experimentation, but it also came with plenty of regrets. Sitting down was awkward, zippers often broke, and laundering polyester was a challenge of its own. Despite their flaws, these jumpsuits became a symbol of 1970s fashion excess, loud, flashy, and impossible to ignore. Looking back today, it is hard not to laugh at how impractical they were, but at the time they were considered stylish and modern. For MTV music video marathons turned watching television into an all-day event. Teens and young adults sat glued to the screen, watching hours of non-stop music videos like they were live performances. Artists became legends thanks to constant rotation, and kids memorized entire videos frame by frame. Parents shook their heads, wondering how anyone could sit in front of the television for that long. But the music video boom was unstoppable. Some kids recorded their favorite videos on VHS and re-watched them until the tapes wore out. Entire friend groups debated which videos were the coolest, and some kids even choreographed dances to copy what they saw on screen. Staying up late for a world premiere was like watching history happen, and no one wanted to miss it. Some people even recorded hours of MTV onto VHS tapes so they could re-watch their favorite videos whenever they wanted. Looking back today, it seems funny how serious everyone was about watching videos on repeat, but it was the cultural heartbeat of the decade. MTV made television feel cool, and music became as visual as it was auditory. Pokery cereal ads with toy bribes turned breakfast into a marketing battlefield. Every Saturday morning, commercials offered kids not only colorful cereal, but also the promise of a toy tucked inside the box. Marketers aggressively used giveaways, plastic cars, action figures, or stickers to hook children into begging their parents for the brand. The cereal itself was often little more than sugar-coated shapes, but the toy made the purchase irresistible. Kids compared collections at school, swapping duplicates and bragging about rare finds. Parents often gave in, knowing the real prize was not nutrition, but appeasing the excitement of their children. For advertisers, the toys were an easy way to build brand loyalty and guarantee repeat purchases. The strategy worked so well that it became nearly impossible for healthier cereals to compete. Looking back, it is shocking how openly companies marketed sugar under the disguise of fun. The ads sold childhood joy in exchange for long-term habits, and many of those cereals still carry the legacy today. Waiting only one family phone line was a recipe for constant conflict. In most households, the phone sat in the kitchen or living room, a long cord stretching across the floor while someone paced during a call. If a sibling or parent stayed on too long, no one else could use it, and worse, the internet was blocked completely. Dial-up required a free phone line, which meant battles broke out nightly over who got priority. Parents argued about missed calls, while kids fought for time to chat with friends or log on to instant messenger. Sometimes you picked up the phone mid-conversation and shouted, "I need the internet." Call waiting helped a little, but it was far from perfect. Teens often had entire relationships built around late-night phone calls, stretching the cord into bedrooms for a sliver of privacy. Today, with every person carrying their own phone, it seems shocking that an entire household once relied on a single line. Back then, though, it was just how life worked. The sound of a busy signal was a daily frustration, and timing your calls became an art. The arguments, the negotiations, and the sheer inconvenience are almost impossible to imagine now. What we see as inconvenience today was simply normal family life in the 90s, a constant push and pull between technology, privacy, and connection. In 1977, shower doors and tub enclosures were not required to use tempered glass. Standard annealed glass, the same brittle material found in picture frames, was installed in bathrooms across the country. When it broke, it did not crumble into small, blunt pieces. It shattered into long, razor-edged shards capable of slicing through skin on contact. In a shower, where you are wet, barefoot, and unclothed, a fall against an annealed glass panel was a serious emergency. The CPSC issued its safety standard for architectural glazing materials in 1977, requiring tempered or laminated safety glass in hazardous locations, including showers and bathtubs. Tempered glass is 4 to 5 times stronger and breaks into small, relatively dull cubes instead of jagged blades. But the standard only applied to new installations. Older bathrooms with original annealed panels were grandfathered in, and many stayed that way well into the 90s, waiting for a slip, a stumble, or a child playing too rough to turn a morning shower into something far worse. If the glass could cut you in an instant, from the 1930s through the 1960s, Lysol disinfectant was the best-selling feminine hygiene product in the United States. Not because women chose it freely, but because gynecologists recommended it. Advertisements featured female physicians in clinical settings, assuring women that douching with diluted Lysol would protect their marriages. The real message, barely coded, was contraception. With birth control still illegal under the Comstock laws until 1965, Lysol offered the illusion of pregnancy prevention. It did not work. A 1933 study at Newark's Maternal Health Center found that of 507 women who used Lysol regularly, nearly half became pregnant. The formula contained cresol until 1953, a caustic phenolic compound that burned vaginal tissue on contact. By 1911, doctors had already documented 193 poisonings and 5 deaths from Lysol douching. Gas station attendants. Filling your tank was the standard experience in many places. You would pull up, roll down your window, and the attendant would come over in a uniform shirt and cap. They pumped your gas, washed your windshield, and sometimes checked your oil, all while you stayed in the car. Kids in the back seat would watch the numbers spin on the pump like it was a slot machine. Attendants often knew regular customers by name and asked about the family. Sometimes they topped off your washer fluid without you even asking. They carried rags in their back pockets and wore hands stained from years of oil and grease. The squeegee work on the windshield was quick but precise, wiping away bug splatters and dust. On cold days, they worked in freezing wind, their breath visible as they leaned in to talk through your window. Some stations even offered a quick tire check, making sure you left safer than when you arrived. Payment was handled right there at your window, cash or card run through a clunky manual machine. There was a rhythm to it. Fill, clean, check, thank you, that made every stop feel like a small service ritual. It was a level of personal interaction that is rare at gas stations today. The idea of getting out to pump your own gas would have seemed unusual in many towns back then. If ackee was banned for what nature put inside it, ephedra was banned for what a corporation concealed. Metabolife 356 was the top-selling ephedra supplement in America during the late 90s, pushed as a weight loss breakthrough. The active compounds, ephedrine alkaloids, spiked heart rate and blood pressure while suppressing appetite. Metabolife International received over 14,000 adverse event reports from customers. Heart attacks, strokes, seizures, psychiatric episodes. The company disclosed none of them. When the Department of Justice compelled Metabolife to release its records in 2002, regulators found more than 15,000 buried complaints. Co-founder Michael Ellis was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison for hiding the data. The FDA collected over 18,000 total adverse reports before issuing a final ban in April 2004. NFL lineman Corey Stringer's heatstroke death in 2001, with ephedra as a contributing factor, became the public face of the crisis. Saffron-flavored licorice candy was a childhood favorite in the 1970s, with distinctive taste that lingered on the tongue long after the last piece was gone. The black twists and drops had depth of flavor that modern licorice struggles to match, something earthy and slightly mysterious that made kids reach for more. Penny candy stores kept jars on low shelves where children could see and smell treats waiting for their coins. The compound responsible for that signature taste was saffron, the same substance found in sassafras root that gave traditional root beer its character. For decades, nobody questioned whether something familiar could be harmful because it had always been part of the candy landscape. But saffron is a known carcinogen, capable of causing liver tumors with prolonged exposure. When regulators banned it from food and beverages, licorice makers scrambled to find alternatives replicating the beloved flavor. Versions sold today use anise and other approved ingredients, but longtime fans insist something essential was lost. That old licorice represented a taste no longer existing legally, a sweetness wrapped in danger nobody recognized until science demanded change. Unlimited salt shakers on cafeteria tables were as common as napkin dispensers, sitting within arm's reach of every student who wanted to season their food without restriction. Kids grabbed them instinctively, shaking white crystals across mashed potatoes, green beans, and anything else that seemed too bland. No one monitored how much sodium poured out, and no one worried about health consequences hiding in each generous shake. It felt like freedom, like being trusted to make your own choices about how food should taste. Some children turned it into a game, competing to see who could pile the most salt onto a single tray. Lunch aides rarely intervened because seasoning food seemed harmless compared to other mischief students could cause. But those tiny shakers added up. When health researchers began connecting childhood sodium intake to long-term blood pressure problems, school nutrition guidelines changed dramatically. Salt shakers were pulled from tables, and kitchens were required to prepare foods within strict sodium limits. Today, giving students unlimited access to salt seems almost reckless, a relic of an era that trusted children with choices we now understand were never truly safe. Typist pools were once the beating heart of every busy office, and walking into one was like stepping into a factory of words. Entire rooms were filled with rows of desks where women sat, typing dictated letters or reports for bosses who rarely touched a typewriter themselves. The sound of hundreds of clacking keys filled the air like a constant machine, creating a rhythm that symbolized productivity in the 20th century. These clerks were expected to work quickly, with flawless spelling and grammar, and mistakes often meant typing the entire page over again. In many cases, women entered the workforce through typist pools, wearing neat dresses and maintaining perfect posture as they kept the words of business moving. But the work was repetitive, tiring, and offered little chance for advancement. Typists were often treated as invisible, even though they were producing every document that kept a company alive. With the arrival of photocopiers, word processors, and computers, the need for massive pools of typists collapsed. It shocks people today to imagine that entire careers once revolved around retyping every dictated word, hour after hour, day after day. Yet for a long time, these women were the unsung engines of the corporate world. Phil walked down a school hallway in the 1980s, and you might catch a whiff of cigarette smoke drifting from the faculty lounge. Teachers gathered between classes, sipping coffee and puffing away while papers piled on their desks. The haze of smoke seeped into the hallways, mixing with the smell of chalk dust and floor wax. Students knew exactly where the lounge was. Passing by meant walking through a wall of secondhand smoke as voices and laughter spilled from the door. It was a symbol of adulthood, a place where authority figures acted like anyone else. Parents accepted it as normal, and schools made no effort to hide it. Ashtrays overflowed, and nobody questioned whether it was appropriate. Teachers who scolded kids for bad habits often returned to the lounge to light up themselves. Today, the idea of teachers smoking inside schools is unimaginable. Looking back, it feels surreal that education and cigarette smoke once coexisted under the same roof. Do you remember the faint smell of tobacco that clung to teachers' clothes during afternoon lessons? Beanbag chairs were the ultimate 1970s rec room accessory. Made from vinyl or fabric and filled with tiny foam beads, they promised comfort and a casual vibe that fit perfectly with the decade's laid-back style. In reality, sitting in one often felt like sinking into quicksand, and standing up was just as difficult. Kids loved them because they were colorful and fun, while parents saw them as affordable alternatives to bulky furniture. Friends would flop into them during movie nights or gaming sessions, sinking down until they practically disappeared. They were sold in every bold shade imaginable, from bright red to lime green, and instantly made any room feel more modern. Despite their impracticality, beanbag chairs were hugely popular, especially among teenagers. They reflected the 1970s idea that comfort and fun could outweigh function. Today, they are seen as retro novelties, but back then they were everywhere, a staple of suburban basements and college dorms. Waterbeds turned bedrooms into sloshing playgrounds. The fad swept through the 1980s with promises of better sleep, luxury, and of course, romance. In reality, they were heavy, messy, and prone to leaks. Moving one required draining gallons of water, and if the vinyl ripped, you were left with a miniature flood. Friends would come over just to bounce around on them, daring each other to jump hard enough to make a wave across the mattress. Couples bragged about owning one as if it were a luxury car parked in their bedroom. Even though they were impractical, the sheer novelty made waterbeds feel futuristic, like sleeping on a science experiment. Still, people loved them. bragging about their modern beds as if they were cutting-edge technology. Kids bounced on them until they nearly burst, and parents sometimes woke up seasick from the constant rolling motion. Ads made them seem glamorous, with couples lounging on beds that looked like indoor pools. In truth, they were impractical and hilarious in hindsight, but they became icons of the decade nonetheless. Waterbeds were proof that in the 1980s, style mattered more than sense, and people were willing to put up with waves in their sleep just to feel trendy. Commercials featuring kids or teens are perhaps the most unsettling examples of advertising gone too far. Some spots blurred the line, showing minors in scenes of celebration or casually included in parties where beer flowed freely. The implication was clear: drinking was part of growing up, and everyone, even the young, could join in. Smiling teens clinked glasses, or children appeared in the background of ads that otherwise focused on adult fun. The casual nature of these portrayals made alcohol look normal and harmless for all ages. Critics called them out, but companies defended the ads as playful or symbolic. The truth is, they were planting seeds early, using images of youth to build comfort with their products. Looking back, it is hard to imagine how these spots ever aired without backlash. Today they feel shocking, but in their moment, they were brushed off as clever marketing. It is a chilling reminder of how blurred the lines once were. Rewinding VHS tapes was a duty every renter knew well. Movie rental stores demanded it, stamping "Be kind, rewind" on every case. Forgetting to rewind meant late fees, which parents never took lightly. Some families even bought standalone rewinding machines to save wear on their VCRs. After finishing a movie, kids scrambled to hit rewind, watching the tape spin backward at high speed. The process could take several minutes, and everyone waited impatiently for the click that meant it was done. Today, the idea of manually rewinding a movie feels bizarre when everything streams instantly with a single tap. Yet rewinding gave a sense of responsibility. You handled the movie with care, returning it the way you received it. Rental stores built entire policies around it, and kids learned quickly that skipping this step meant consequences. What shocks people now is the effort involved in something as simple as watching a movie. But in the 90s, rewinding was just part of the experience. It made movies feel tangible, like precious items you borrowed from the world and had to return properly. It was a small ritual, but it defined the way families interacted with entertainment. In the early 1970s, a residential water heater shipped with its thermostat preset to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. No warning label on the unit, no anti-scald mixing valve on any faucet, and no industry standard suggesting a safer setting. At 140 degrees, a child's skin sustained a severe burn in 3 seconds. At 120, the same injury took 10 minutes. That 20-degree gap was the difference between a safe bath and a hospital visit, but nobody adjusted for it. The Consumer Product Safety Commission reported that tap water scalds hospitalized 1,500 Americans annually and killed roughly 100. 34% of scald burns in young kids happened in the bathroom. Washington State passed the first law requiring water heaters to be preset to 120 degrees in 1983. Manufacturers did not adopt a voluntary national standard until 1988. The bath 3 or 4 TV channels meant your entertainment choices were slim but somehow enough. Most homes had ABC, CBS, NBC, and maybe a local independent station if you were lucky. Saturday mornings were for cartoons, evenings for family sitcoms, and if you missed a show, you had to wait for a rerun months later. There was no scrolling through endless menus, just turning the knob until something appeared on the screen. Snowy reception meant adjusting the rabbit ear antennas until the picture came in clear. Sometimes someone had to stand just right, holding the antenna, for the picture to stay steady. Late-night TV often signed off with the national anthem before going to static until morning. Big events, like the moon landing or a major sports game, were moments when the whole country tuned in together. Kids learned which nights their favorite shows aired and made sure homework was done in time. There was a sense of ceremony in gathering in the living room for a show the whole family wanted to see. Commercial breaks were long enough for a snack run to the kitchen without pausing anything. When a big event aired, everyone you knew watched it at the same time. It gave television a shared rhythm that no one questioned. Now, with hundreds of channels and streaming on demand, it is almost hard to believe how simple television once was. Rotary dial. Telephones in every home were more than just communication. They were part of the furniture. Every kitchen pantry in the 1970s held rows of canned goods sealed with a thin bead of lead tin alloy along the side seam. The process was cheap, reliable, and kept food stable for years. What nobody measured was what happened when acidic foods like tomatoes and citrus sat against that lead seam for months at a time. The acid drew the metal straight into the food. A 1982 study by the National Academy of Sciences determined that lead-soldered cans were responsible for up to half the total daily lead intake in some individuals. Kids absorbed lead at 4 to 5 times the rate adults did, and canned infant formula ranked among the worst offenders. The sharp, faintly metallic taste of certain canned fruits was not a flaw in the recipe, it was the lead. The industry called the amounts negligible. Federal regulations finally phased out lead solder in American food cans by the mid-1980s. By that point, entire generations had been eating contaminated food at every meal. Violet number 1. Purple frosting made birthday cakes in the 1970s look like something from a fantasy world, with swirls and flowers and shades so vivid they seemed to glow under party lights. Bakers loved this dye because it produced a rich, stable purple that did not fade or bleed the way natural colorings did. Parents ordered custom cakes knowing the purple roses would photograph beautifully and make children feel like royalty. Kids scraped frosting off with their fingers, not caring about the cake beneath because that brilliant purple sweetness was the real prize. The color showed up in candies too, coating gumdrops and lollipops with an intensity that captured every child's attention. But behind that glamorous shade was a synthetic compound researchers studied with growing concern. By 1973, evidence suggested violet number 1 might contribute to cancer, and regulators moved swiftly to ban it from all food products. Birthday parties continued, but cakes looked different afterward, missing that particular purple that once seemed so magical. The color was never forgotten, even as families learned to distrust it, a reminder that brightness sometimes hides darkness. Full-fat cheese smothering nachos and pizza was one of the great pleasures of 80s school lunches, thick orange layers that stretched and pulled with every bite. Pizza day meant rectangles of dough buried under blankets of melted cheese glistening under heat lamps, while nacho day brought mountains of chips covered in warm cheese sauce dripping from every edge. Kids devoured these meals without a thought about fat content or dietary consequences. Cheese was simply delicious, a food group unto itself that made everything taste better. Schools served it generously because children actually ate their lunches when cheese was involved, solving the problem of wasted food and hungry afternoon students. The cheese came from massive blocks or industrial bags, measured by the handful rather than the ounce. But full-fat dairy carried more saturated fat than nutritionists eventually deemed acceptable for growing children. When federal guidelines restricted the types of cheese schools could serve, cafeterias switched to reduced fat versions that melted differently and tasted less rich. Students today eat pizza and nachos that look similar but lack the indulgent quality that made those meals legendary. The milkman was once as familiar a sight in American neighborhoods as the mail carrier. Every morning, families would leave empty glass bottles on their porch or doorstep, and before sunrise, the milkman would quietly replace them with fresh, cold bottles straight from the dairy. In a time before reliable refrigeration, this was the only way to ensure households had safe milk each day. Children often remember the clinking of bottles as the milkman made his rounds, carrying a heavy crate while wearing a crisp uniform and cap. He might also deliver cream, butter, or even eggs, making him a trusted figure in daily life. For many families, the milkman was more than just a delivery man, he was part of the rhythm of home. But the work was grueling. Milk had to be delivered quickly and on time no matter the weather. Hot summers, freezing winters, and pouring rain never stopped the routine. As supermarkets expanded and refrigerators became common in the 1950s and 1960s, the role of the milkman faded. Today, it shocks people to think of an entire workforce devoted to delivering a single food item door to door. Yet for decades, this job was an essential part of life, connecting communities and feeding families one bottle at a time. On summer weekends in the 1980s, kids piled into the back of pickup trucks like it was the best ride in town. Parents waved from the porch as a truck pulled away, its bed filled with children sitting on the sides, legs dangling, hair flying in the wind. It felt like freedom, a rolling parade float for the neighborhood. There were no seatbelts, no restraints, and no rules. Kids stood up while the truck was moving, bounced on the ridges of the metal bed, or sprawled flat as the wind whipped above them. The faster the truck went, the more thrilling the ride became. Rural highways, dirt roads, or even city streets, it did not matter. The open bed was a playground on wheels. Adults did not see it as dangerous, just part of growing up. In some towns, entire groups of kids rode to Little League games in the back, gloves on their hands, bats sticking up like antennas. It was common at parades, too, with children throwing candy while standing in the back of moving trucks. Today, laws forbid this in most places, and for good reason. But for kids who grew up in that era, the memory of riding through warm summer nights under the open sky remains powerful. Do you remember holding onto the side of a pickup bed as the world raced past? Beer can hats were one of the strangest fashion crafts of the 1970s. People collected empty aluminum beer cans, cut off the tops and bottoms, and crocheted them into caps using colorful yarn. The result was a shiny, clunky headpiece that combined recycling with style. Craft fairs and hobby magazines encouraged the trend, framing it as both thrifty and creative. Friends exchanged them as gifts, and some even wore them proudly to parties or barbecues. They were heavy, awkward, and uncomfortable, but they symbolized the do-it-yourself spirit of the decade. Kids often helped parents save cans, turning the whole process into a family project. Today, the idea of wearing a hat made from beer cans seems laughable, but in the 1970s it was considered clever. Knit beer can hats stand as proof that the decade embraced fads that blended creativity with absurdity. Novelty telephone swatch watch stacking was one of the quirkiest fashion choices of the 1980s. Instead of wearing just one colorful plastic watch, teens began wearing several at once, stacked up and down their arms like bracelets. The more you wore, the cooler you looked, or at least that was the idea. Swatch watches came in neon colors, bold patterns, and wild designs that made every wrist look like a carnival. Some kids had entire collections, swapping out watches to match their outfits like jewelry. Stores cashed in on the craze, with displays that looked more like candy shops than watch counters. Having multiple swatches on your wrist was less about telling time and more about shouting, "Look at me." Collecting them became an obsession, and entire outfits were built around which swatches you chose to wear. Adults scratched their heads wondering why anyone needed 4 watches to tell the same time. The truth was, it was not about practicality at all. It was about standing out. Today, the idea of layering watches seems silly, but in the 1980s, it was peak style. Swatch stacking turned telling time into a fashion statement, one that now feels funny but perfectly captures the playful excess of the decade. Ads on primetime television were once as common as commercials for laundry detergent. Before the bans, some of the biggest stars in entertainment openly endorsed cigarette brands during family shows. Popular actors, athletes, and even talk show hosts lit up on screen, promising smoother flavor or cleaner smoke. The ads were not limited to late-night hours either. They aired during the very programs kids and parents watched together. Entire families might see their favorite celebrity recommend a particular brand, turning it into the cool or trusted choice. The commercials made smoking seem not only safe but glamorous, framing it as a natural part of modern living. What makes it so unsettling now is how openly the ads invaded the spaces where health warnings should have mattered most. Children were exposed to them constantly, and parents received the subliminal message that smoking was an acceptable part of daily life. The shift from primetime endorsements to outright bans shows just how dramatically cultural understanding changed. But back then, lighting up with your favorite star felt like the most natural thing in the world. Blockbuster on a Friday night was not just a stop, it was a tradition. Families piled into the car after dinner, heading to that brightly lit blue and yellow store with its shelves full of VHS tapes. Walking inside, you were greeted with the smell of plastic cases and popcorn, rows upon rows of movies stacked tightly in their sleeves. The newest releases had only a handful of copies, and if you were lucky enough to grab one, it felt like winning a prize. If not, you had to settle for something else, often negotiating with your siblings in the aisles. Kids wandered toward the candy section, pleading with parents for one more box of chocolate or microwave popcorn. Choosing a movie took time, and part of the fun was walking through the aisles together, picking up cases, and reading the backs. The entire process made movie night feel like an outing, not just a quick choice on a menu. Returning the movies was its own responsibility, with late fees hanging over your head if you forgot. Today, streaming services give us endless choices instantly, but the excitement is gone. The sense of scarcity, only one copy of Jurassic Park waiting on the shelf, made the experience thrilling. People today might be shocked at how much effort went into simply watching a movie, but for families in the 90s, that trip to Blockbuster was pure magic. It turned an ordinary Friday night into something special. Having vinyl floor tiles manufactured by Armstrong, Kentile, and Flint Coat contained asbestos fibers mixed directly into the material for durability and heat resistance. They were installed in millions of bathrooms from the 1920s through the late 70s, and the black mastic adhesive used to glue them down also contained asbestos. As long as the tiles stayed intact, the fibers remained trapped. But bathroom floors take constant abuse. Moisture warps the edges, foot traffic cracks the surface, and when a tile chipped or broke, microscopic asbestos fibers became airborne in a small enclosed room with poor ventilation. The EPA began restricting asbestos in the late 1970s, but tiles already installed were never required to be removed. Every bathroom renovation in an older home carried the risk of releasing a known carcinogen into the lungs of whoever was standing nearby with a scraper in hand. If the diet pills kept you wired during the day, the barbiturates were supposed to bring you down at night. Phenobarbital was the drug your family doctor prescribed for everything that could not be diagnosed: exam anxiety, wedding day nerves, a rough patch in a marriage, trouble sleeping after a move. It was a powerful central nervous system depressant, a drug now classified as a Schedule IV controlled substance and reserved almost exclusively for epilepsy treatment. But in the 1960s, a general practitioner could write you a prescription in under 2 minutes and send you home with a bottle of 60 tablets. The therapeutic dose and the lethal dose were not far apart, and mixing phenobarbital with alcohol, which millions of Americans did every evening, narrowed that gap to almost nothing. Overdose deaths were so common, they barely made the local papers. No helmets. While riding bikes or skateboards was just how it was. You climbed onto your bike, maybe with a banana seat and long chrome handlebars, and rode off down the street without a thought to head protection. Skateboards were slim, hard plastic boards with narrow wheels, and kids zipped down driveways or makeshift ramps bareheaded. Falls were part of the deal. You got scraped elbows, bruised knees, and maybe a goose egg on your head, and then you got back on. Parents told you to be careful, and that was the extent of the safety lecture. Neighborhood races often meant weaving between parked cars at full speed. If you wiped out, friends helped you up, brushed off the gravel, and sent you on your way. Summer afternoons were filled with daring stunts off homemade plywood ramps. Sometimes you rode barefoot, just because it felt faster and freer. Protective gear was something you only saw in magazines, not in real life. Some kids rode 2 or 3 on a single bike, one on the handlebars, another balanced on the back wheel pegs. Nobody owned knee or elbow pads unless they played organized sports. The idea of wearing a helmet for casual riding just did not exist. Today, it is shocking to think of the risks, but in the 1970s, it was simply freedom on wheels. Only 3 sassafras root beer floats were a beloved treat in the 1970s, combining fizzy sweetness with scoops of vanilla ice cream in glasses that seemed to overflow with pure joy. The root beer had a distinctive flavor, earthy and complex, that came from sassafras root bark. an ingredient used in American recipes for over a century. Kids lined up at soda fountains and corner drugstores, watching foam rise and fall as cold ice cream met dark liquid. Families kept bottles home for special occasions, and the smell alone brought back memories of summer afternoons. That signature taste felt like tradition itself, something passed down through generations without question. But inside the root bark was saffrol, and researchers discovered it caused liver damage and cancer in laboratory studies. The findings forced regulators to act, banning saffrol from all food and stripping sassafras of its place in root beer recipes. Modern versions use artificial flavoring that tries to mimic the original, but anyone who tasted the real thing knows the difference. Those old floats carried a flavor that no longer exists legally, a sweetness tied to a danger nobody imagined while sipping through striped paper straws. White bread for every sandwich was the unspoken rule in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s. Soft slices that held together peanut butter, bologna, and whatever else lunch workers assembled each morning. The bread was pale, pillowy, and completely devoid of anything resembling whole grain nutrition. Kids loved it because it was familiar, the same bread their mothers used at home, the same texture they associated with comfort and normalcy. Nobody questioned whether refined flour was good for growing bodies because nobody thought about bread as anything other than a vehicle for fillings. Schools bought it in bulk because it was cheap, lasted long, and never drew complaints from picky eaters. The sandwiches stacked up on trays by the hundreds, wrapped in plastic or nestled in paper boats, waiting for hungry students who never imagined their bread choices mattered. But when nutrition science caught up with cafeteria menus, white bread became a symbol of everything wrong with school lunches. Federal mandates now require that at least half of all grains served in schools be whole grain rich, effectively banning the pure white bread that once dominated every lunch line. Leech collectors were among the most unsettling workers of earlier centuries, and the thought of it still makes people shudder. Medicine once relied heavily on bloodletting, and leeches were considered a vital tool for curing illness. That meant entire families could make a living wading into swamps, ponds, and marshes, letting leeches latch onto their bare legs so they could be gathered by the dozens. These collectors would endure painful bites, constant bleeding, and the risk of infection, all to supply doctors with jars of wriggling leeches. Children were often sent into the water because their small bodies attracted more leeches, which is horrifying to imagine today. Once collected, the leeches were sold to apothecaries and physicians who used them in treatments ranging from fevers to headaches. The work was messy, bloody, and exhausting, but in its time it was considered respectable because it supported the health industry. With the decline of bloodletting and the rise of modern medicine, the profession vanished. But the idea of families sending children into swamp water to collect parasites for profit is shocking to us now, a reminder of how different life and medicine once were. In the 1980s, cigarette vending machines were as common as soda machines. They stood in diners, bowling alleys, and even grocery stores. For the price of a few quarters, anyone, adult or child, could pull a lever and walk away with a pack of Marlboros or Camels. Teenagers bought cigarettes openly, often laughing as they fed coins into the machines while adults looked on without concern. The machines lit up, humming quietly, and dropped packs into the tray with a satisfying thud. No ID, no questions, just access. Tobacco companies knew exactly what they were doing, placing machines in places kids already gathered. Even non-smokers grew up familiar with the sight, considering it no more unusual than a candy machine. By the 1990s, regulations cracked down, removing vending machines from most public places. Looking back, it is startling that addictive products were sold this way with no restrictions. Do you remember the sound of that lever clanking as a fresh pack dropped into your hand? Custom van murals turned parking lots into art shows in the 1970s. It was not enough just to own a van. You had to decorate it with bold, hand-painted artwork that often featured wizards, dragons, sunsets, or cosmic landscapes. These rolling canvases reflected the era's obsession with individuality and freedom, with many owners seeing their vans as an extension of their personality. Pulling up at a concert or beach with a van covered in a dramatic mural instantly made you stand out. Artists made entire businesses out of customizing vehicles, and some designs became so elaborate that they looked like something from an album cover. Inside, the vans were often just as wild, with shag carpeting, curtains, and even small bars, completing the feeling that the van was both transportation and lifestyle. Parents might have shaken their heads, but young adults embraced it as part of the decade's adventurous spirit. For many, a van mural was not just decoration, but a declaration of independence and style. Today, seeing a van with a hand-painted wizard on the side might feel like a joke, but in the 1970s it was taken seriously and admired. It was an art form that drove down the street, bold, and candy ads promising popularity targeted kids at their most vulnerable. Campaigns suggested that eating a certain chocolate bar or chewing a particular gum would instantly make you more likable. The message was not subtle. Kids without the candy were left out, while the lucky ones were surrounded by friends. Commercials staged playground scenes where sharing sweets magically transformed social status. For children desperate to fit in, the implication was irresistible. Candy was not just a treat, it was the key to belonging. Parents often saw the ads as harmless fun, never realizing how much pressure it put on their kids. The reality was that sugar companies were selling more than sweets. They were selling acceptance. Looking back, it is startling how manipulative the strategy was, dressed up in jingles and smiling faces. Candy may have tasted sweet, but the message left behind was bitter. The promise of instant popularity was a powerful, if damaging, hook. Disposable cameras turned every photo into a gamble. You bought one for a vacation, birthday party, or school trip, and used it sparingly because every click mattered. There was no screen to preview, no way to delete, just the hope that you caught the moment. When the roll was finished, you dropped it off at a drugstore or photo lab and waited days, sometimes weeks, to see the results. Picking up the glossy prints was exciting, but also full of disappointment. Some photos were too dark, others blurry, and often someone's eyes were closed. Still, the process made photos feel more valuable. Families flipped through albums filled with real prints, imperfect but authentic. Today's endless selfies and instant retakes make disposable cameras seem painfully slow, yet their charm has returned as a novelty. What shocks people today is the patience it required, waiting weeks just to know if you had a single good shot. But back then, it was normal. Every blurry photo told a story, and every camera roll felt like a mystery box waiting to be revealed. The imperfections became part of the memory, something digital photography can never quite replicate. Homes built before 1962 had standard two-prong electrical outlets in the bathroom, mounted on the wall within arm's reach of the sink and the tub. A grounding wire provides a safe path for stray current to return to the panel instead of passing through a human body. Without that wire, a short circuit in any appliance, a razor, a radio, a heat lamp, sent the current looking for the nearest ground, which in a wet bathroom was often the person standing on damp tile or touching a metal faucet. Many older homes also lacked a dedicated bathroom circuit. The outlets shared wiring with bedrooms and hallways, increasing the load and the risk of overheating at every connection point. These two-prong outlets were never banned. The National Electrical Code required grounded three-prong receptacles in new construction, but millions of older bathrooms kept their original wiring for decades. No federal mandate has ever required homeowners to replace existing ungrounded outlets unless a renovation triggers a code compliance inspection. Georgia Pacific, National Gypsum, and several other manufacturers. Before infant acetaminophen existed, mothers kept a small brown bottle of paregoric on the shelf beside the baby formula. It was a camphorated tincture of opium containing morphine, anise oil, and benzoic acid, and it was sold without a prescription in pharmacies across the country. Doctors recommended it for teething pain, infant colic, diarrhea, and fussy sleeping. The dosage instructions printed right on the label included infants as young as 5 days old. A single ounce contained roughly 13 milligrams of morphine. Parents rubbed it on swollen gums, mixed it into bottles, and spooned it directly into tiny mouths without a second thought, because their own pediatrician had told them to. It took until 1970, for the federal government to reclassify paregoric under the Controlled Substances Act, finally requiring a prescription. By then, generations of American babies had been dosed with opium before they could walk. If cyclamate proved how fast regulators could move on shaky evidence, Alar showed how slowly they acted when the science was strong. Alar was a growth chemical sprayed on apples to give red delicious varieties their uniform color. Uniroyal Chemical registered it in 1963. By the early 80s, researchers flagged Alar and its breakdown product UDMH as probable carcinogens. The EPA proposed a ban in 1985, then retreated under industry pressure. It proposed again in early 1989 and retreated again. A February 1989 broadcast of 60 Minutes, seen by 40 million viewers, finally shattered the deadlock. Schools yanked apples from cafeterias. Meryl Streep testified before Congress. Growers sued CBS and lost. Uniroyal pulled Alar before the EPA's ban took effect. Unpasteurized milk puddings were a creamy indulgence in the 1970s, made from fresh farm milk that came straight from the dairy without processing to alter its richness. Families near farms prized this milk for its thick texture and sweet, grassy flavor that store-bought versions could not replicate. Mothers heated it slowly on the stove, stirring in sugar, eggs, and vanilla until pudding thickened into something luxurious. Children scraped bowls clean, asking for seconds before the first serving cooled. The pudding tasted like the countryside, fresh and honest and free from anything artificial. People trusted raw milk because it came from neighbors, from animals grazing in pastures, from a process that felt more natural than factories. But unpasteurized milk harbors dangerous bacteria that pasteurization was designed to kill. Outbreaks of illness traced back to raw dairy forced regulators to restrict its sale, especially in commercial food production. Today, selling unpasteurized milk puddings would violate health codes in most places, turning a beloved comfort food into something considered too risky. That simple dessert now represents an era when trust outweighed testing. Pink slime meat fillers in ground beef were one of the cafeteria secrets that nobody talked about because nobody even knew they existed. The hamburgers and taco meat that children ate throughout the 1980s contained something called lean, finely textured beef, a product made from scraps and trimmings, spun in centrifuges and treated with ammonia to kill bacteria. It stretched the meat supply, lowered costs, and allowed schools to serve more students with smaller budgets. Kids bit into burgers believing they were eating real ground beef, never imagining that a portion came from processed leftovers that barely resembled meat. The texture blended in perfectly, masked by ketchup, mustard, and whatever else children piled on top. For years, this filler moved through school kitchens without question. But when journalists and food safety advocates exposed the practice, the public reaction was fierce. Parents demanded transparency, regulators tightened requirements, and pink slime was eventually banned from school cafeterias nationwide. Today, ground beef served to students must meet stricter standards that leave no room for the mystery fillers that once stretched every serving. Switchboard operators were once the lifeline of every single call made across the country. Before automatic dialing, every call had to be physically connected by hand. Picture entire rooms filled wall to wall with mostly young women, each sitting at a large panel covered in cords and jacks, plugging and unplugging wires all day long. It was not just answering calls, but remembering lines, handling multiple connections at once, and sometimes listening in to make sure the call went through properly. In the early days, callers would simply pick up the receiver and wait until a friendly voice said, "Number please," and that was the switchboard operator. These workers became the hidden voice behind daily communication, keeping businesses, families, and even emergency services connected. But it was exhausting work, with long hours and constant attention required to keep calls flowing. Operators often developed fast reflexes and an almost photographic memory for numbers. Over time, new technology slowly replaced them with automated systems. Today, it feels almost unbelievable that every phone call once depended on an actual person sitting at a desk, working cords like a puppet master. What we now take for granted in seconds once relied on endless patience and skill, and it truly shocks us to imagine how critical and human that work once was. Piles in the 1980s were stocked with BB guns, cap guns, and plastic pistols that looked nearly identical to real weapons. They were painted black, weighted to feel authentic, and often carried proudly by kids playing cops and robbers in the streets. From a distance, there was no way to tell the difference. Children aimed them at each other during backyard battles, chasing through neighborhoods with realistic rifles in their hands. Parents encouraged it, telling their sons it was good practice for learning responsibility. Stores sold them freely, often displayed next to toy soldiers or cowboy sets. The danger was obvious, but society brushed it aside. Police encounters were less tense then, and neighbors rarely called in a man with a gun report when they saw kids running around. For children, the more realistic the toy, the better. Today, toy guns are brightly colored, stamped with orange tips, and regulated heavily to prevent confusion. Looking back, it feels shocking to remember entire groups of kids running through suburban streets holding BB pistols that looked like police weapons. Do you remember gripping a toy gun so real that you felt like a soldier in your own backyard war? Watermelon helmets at sporting events were as ridiculous as they sound, yet they became a short-lived fad in the 1970s. Fans would carve out actual watermelons, scoop out the fruit, and wear the hollow shells on their heads to cheer for their teams. The sticky mess and heavy weight did not matter. It was all about standing out and showing loyalty. Entire sections of stadiums glowed green with fans wearing matching watermelon helmets, creating a spectacle that cameras loved to pan across. It was silly, impractical, and surprisingly popular for a time. Parents even joined in, turning games into family events with everyone donning a melon. Looking back, it is hard to imagine anyone wanting to wear fruit on their head, but in the 1970s, it felt like a harmless way to have fun. The fad eventually disappeared, but not before leaving behind plenty of sticky memories and photographs that seem almost unbelievable today. Boom boxes on shoulders turned sidewalks into concert stages in the 1980s. These massive stereos were heavy, bulky, and required a mountain of batteries, but carrying one on your shoulder was a badge of honor. Teens strutted through neighborhoods blasting the latest hits, turning heads and sometimes drawing complaints from adults. The sound was loud and unmissable, filling entire city blocks with bass and treble, whether you liked it or not. For many kids, the boombox was more than music. It was identity, culture, and confidence rolled into one. They became symbols of hip-hop, breakdancing, and street culture, with crews practicing routines on sidewalks while the music thundered from a speaker perched precariously on someone's shoulder. Parents saw them as noise machines, while kids saw them as freedom itself. Looking back, it is funny to imagine teenagers lugging around 30 pounds of plastic and electronics just to play a cassette tape, but that was exactly the point. The boombox was over the top, and in the 1980s, that was cool. Makeup ads promising obedient women are some of the most jaw-dropping relics of the 1970s. Certain campaigns literally tied beauty to submission, suggesting that women who used their products would be more pleasing, more manageable, and more acceptable to men. The ads were dressed up with soft lighting, elegant music, and romantic slogans, but the underlying message was clear. Cosmetics were not about self-expression. They were about control. Models gazed longingly at men who looked on approvingly, as though mascara or lipstick was the secret to a compliant personality. For teenage girls flipping through magazines, these messages set a dangerous standard about what it meant to be attractive. The ads reinforced outdated gender roles under the guise of glamour, selling the idea that beauty meant silence and obedience. In a decade where women were fighting for equality in the workplace and beyond, the contrast is staggering. It shows how deeply advertising clung to old stereotypes, even as society was pushing forward. Today, these ads look more like satire than marketing, but in their time, they were taken seriously. When a child came home from school with head lice in the 1960s, the treatment was dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, DDT, dusted directly onto the scalp. School nurses kept canisters of the white powder in their offices. Parents bought it at the hardware store. The same chemical compound that had been sprayed in massive quantities across Pacific battlefields during World War II was now being rubbed into the hair of 6-year-olds, rinsed out over kitchen sinks, and absorbed through the thin skin behind their ears. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had warned the country about DDT's environmental devastation as early as 1962, and President Kennedy ordered his Science Advisory Committee to investigate. But the chemical stayed legal for human use. The U.S. military quietly removed DDT from its own supply system in 1965 after body lice developed resistance to it. American kids apparently were not given the same consideration. The EPA did not ban DDT until 1972. Floppy disks were once the backbone of schoolwork. These plastic squares were fragile, thin, and held barely more data than a single photo today, yet students treated them like treasure. Saving a project meant sliding the disk into a computer with a satisfying click, watching the tiny green light flash as your work transferred. Losing one in the bottom of a backpack was disastrous, and a corrupted disk could wipe out weeks of effort. Teachers accepted them without question, handing out assignments that all came back saved on floppies. Kids often carried several, labeled in messy handwriting, stuffed into little plastic cases. At the time, it felt modern and high-tech, even though the capacity was laughably small. Printing at school often required students to bring their disk from home, hoping it would read properly in the lab computer. Compared to today's cloud storage and flash drives, floppy disks feel fragile and inconvenient. What makes them shocking now is not just the technology, but how dependent people were on something so unreliable. They symbolized the early steps of digital life, teaching an entire generation how to save, store, and transport their work. For better or worse, floppy disks made kids feel like little professionals, carrying their futures in plastic squares that could fit in a pocket. Coumarin-flavored vanilla cakes were the pride of home bakers in the 1970s, delivering rich, warm sweetness that made every slice taste like something from a professional bakery. Coumarin was a synthetic compound mimicking vanilla beans at a fraction of the cost, allowing families to create elaborate layer cakes without spending a fortune on pure extract. The smell alone filled kitchens with comforting aroma everyone associated with celebration. Bakers trusted it because it performed beautifully, blending into batters without bitter aftertaste. Children licked beaters clean, never questioning what gave the batter its delicious sweetness. But coumarin did more than flavor desserts. Researchers discovered it caused liver damage when consumed regularly, building up in the body and creating problems emerging only after years of exposure. The FDA banned coumarin from food products once evidence became undeniable, forcing bakers to switch to approved vanilla flavorings that cost more but carried no hidden risks. The cakes still taste wonderful, but that particular warmth from old recipes disappeared along with the compound that made them possible. Sweetness and danger had shared the same spoon. Full sugar chocolate pudding cups were the crown jewels of the cafeteria dessert section. Small plastic containers filled with smooth sweetness that made even the worst lunch days feel survivable. Kids peeled back the foil lids with anticipation, sometimes licking them clean before diving into the pudding with plastic spoons that bent under the pressure of eager scooping. The chocolate flavor was intense and unapologetically sweet, the kind of dessert that coated your tongue and lingered long after the last bite. Schools offered them freely, sometimes encouraging seconds for students who finished their main courses. Parents saw pudding as a harmless treat, something that made children happy without causing obvious harm. But those little cups contained far more sugar than anyone realized, packed into servings that exceeded what modern nutritionists consider safe for a single meal. When federal guidelines began restricting added sugars in school meals, chocolate pudding cups became one of the first casualties. The versions available today are reformulated with artificial sweeteners or reduced sugar content that changes the taste entirely. For anyone who remembers the original, the difference is clear. Elevator operators were once a symbol of modern convenience, but the job itself feels almost absurd by today's standards. When elevators first appeared in department stores, office towers, and hotels, people did not trust themselves to operate the machinery. Instead, trained attendants stood by the controls, opening and closing the doors, pushing floor buttons, and announcing each level with polite precision. Dressed in uniforms, often with white gloves, they gave elevators an air of sophistication and order. Customers would step inside expecting both service and safety, and the operator was responsible for the smooth, reassuring ride. Many had to memorize building layouts, giving tips to tourists or carrying on pleasant small talk. But beneath the surface, it was repetitive, sometimes boring work with long hours spent standing in a small space. As elevators became automatic in the mid-20th century, operators were slowly replaced by simple push-button panels. The idea that entire careers once centered around pressing buttons for passengers is almost hard to imagine now. Yet in its day, it was not only respectable but also necessary, and many people remember elevator operators as part of the charm of visiting the city. In the 1980s, the phrase, "just a few beers," was used like a free pass. People finished up at a local bar, walked to their cars, and drove home without a second thought. Friends laughed, police often looked the other way unless someone was swerving badly, and it was treated as a routine part of nightlife. Commercials warned against drunk driving, but they felt distant, like they were talking about the real drunks, not the average worker who stopped for a six-pack after his shift. Backyard barbecues ended with neighbors hopping into their cars after a few drinks, their kids riding in the back seat without belts. It was normalized to the point that arguing against it made you sound uptight. Accidents happened often, but the culture framed them as bad luck rather than the obvious outcome of drinking and driving. Only by the late 1980s did campaigns like Mothers Against Drunk Driving start to shift public opinion, making designated driver a common term. Before that, drinking and driving was just another weekend routine. Looking back, it is chilling to realize how casually people risked their own lives and others. Today, even one beer before driving can lead to an arrest or worse, but in the 1980s, just a few was a common excuse. Do you remember when finishing a beer and grabbing the car keys felt like no big deal? Toilet covers might be one of the most baffling home decor choices of the 1970s. Bathrooms across America were suddenly filled with plush covers for toilet lids, tank tops, and even matching rugs. The idea was to make bathrooms look more comfortable and coordinated, but in reality, it created spaces that seemed more like living rooms than washrooms. The fuzzy fabric absorbed moisture and odors, making them impractical and unsanitary. Yet, stores sold them in every shade imaginable: mustard yellow, avocado green, or bright orange to match the era's color schemes. Guests were expected to admire the cozy look, even if they wondered why anyone would want fur on a toilet. It was part of a larger trend of turning every corner of the house into a showcase of style, even the bathroom. Today, the idea seems almost comical, but in the 1970s, furry toilet covers were considered the height of home fashion. They perfectly capture how the decade embraced bold decor choices, no matter how strange they seem now. Trapper keepers with loud designs were the school accessory every kid wanted. These binders came with wild patterns, bright colors, and Velcro flaps that snapped shut with a satisfying rip. They held folders, notebooks, and secret notes passed in class, and having one instantly made you cool. Kids compared designs, traded, and bragged about whose Trapper Keeper had the flashiest cover. Opening one in class made a sound that every kid recognized instantly, and sometimes that Velcro rip was louder than the teacher's voice. Some Trapper Keepers had covers so wild, neon shapes, lightning bolts, or space scenes, that they felt more like toys than school supplies. Collecting them was a point of pride, and kids treated their binders like prized possessions. Parents grumbled about the price, but gave in because they knew how badly their kids wanted one. Teachers sometimes banned them for being too distracting, especially when students opened and closed the Velcro over and over. Looking back, it is hilarious how much status was tied to a simple binder, but that was the magic of the 1980s. The Trapper Keeper was not just school supplies, it was identity. Loss ads. Pushing amphetamines were disturbingly casual in their approach. In glossy magazines and late-night commercials, energy pills were marketed as the perfect way to slim down quickly. The ads promised not only rapid weight loss, but also more energy, more confidence, and even better moods. Teenagers and adults alike saw these products as modern miracles, never realizing the dangers hidden inside. Amphetamines were presented as harmless aids, often alongside smiling women in bikinis or business attire. Doctors were quoted or actors posed as experts, lending the campaigns a false sense of authority. For young women especially, the pressure to stay thin made these ads incredibly powerful. Families flipped through pages that treated dangerous substances like harmless supplements. The shocking part is how normalized it was, as though popping pills was no different from drinking a cup of coffee. These ads highlight just how far companies went to profit off insecurity, no matter the cost. AOL free trial CDs were absolutely everywhere in the 90s. These shiny discs arrived in the mail so often, they piled up in kitchen drawers and living room baskets like junk mail. They were tucked inside magazines, handed out in stores, and even stacked like candy at checkout counters. The promise was always the same: hundreds of free hours online, sometimes as much as 1,000, though most people never actually got that far. Families tried them over and over, swapping out one CD for the next, in hopes of stretching the internet for just a little longer without paying. Soon, the discs lost their magic and simply became clutter. Some people turned them into coasters, others strung them up as decorations, and a few even used them as makeshift frisbees. What is shocking today is how aggressively AOL pushed them. Millions of discs were sent out, blanketing the country in shiny plastic. They became such a common sight that people joked you could not walk down the street without tripping over one. In a way, they represent both the optimism and the absurd waste of early internet culture. Now, with internet built into our phones, the idea of relying on a free trial disc to get online feels like ancient history. But for anyone who remembers, those AOL CDs are a nostalgic symbol of a time when going online still felt like discovering a brand new world. If your home was built before the 1970s, there was a narrow slot on the back wall of the medicine cabinet, just wide enough to slide a used razor blade through. The blade dropped into the wall cavity and was never seen again. No collection box, no sealed container, no removal mechanism. The blades fell between the studs and piled up for decades. Renovation contractors who opened bathroom walls in older homes routinely found hundreds of rusted blades stacked in loose piles behind the plaster, some still sharp enough to cut through a work glove. No regulation required the slots to be sealed. No code addressed what happened to the blades once they disappeared. The practice faded as disposable cartridge razors replaced double-edged safety blades, but the walls of older American homes still hold the evidence. The danger in a 1970s bathroom was not just behind the walls, it was under your bare feet. Charcoal and Robitussin. AC sat on the same pharmacy shelf as Band-Aids and rubbing alcohol, and they did not require a prescription. These cherry-flavored cough syrups contained codeine, an opioid derived from the same poppy plant as morphine, blended with a generous pour of grain alcohol. When cold season hit a household, parents dosed the entire family from the same bottle, spooning it into children as young as 3 or 4 years old. The codeine suppressed the cough by acting directly on the brain's cough center, and the alcohol ensured that everyone slept deeply whether they needed to or not. Nobody called it what it was: an opioid sedative mixed with liquor, dispensed to minors without medical supervision. It was not until the late 1970s that the FDA began restricting codeine-containing cough preparations, and some formulations remained available without a prescription well into the 1990s. TVs without remote controls meant you had to get up to change the channel or adjust the volume. Sets were bulky, heavy pieces of furniture with knobs that clicked as you turned them. Kids were often the unofficial remote controls, sent to switch stations during commercial breaks. If you wanted better reception, you twisted the antennas until the picture cleared. Fine-tuning was an actual dial you turned to make the image sharper. Sometimes aluminum foil was wrapped around the antenna tips for better reception. Channel surfing was a workout. You could only flip one station at a time by hand. Parents often claimed the good chair closest to the TV so they could change channels without getting up. If you lost your place during fine-tuning, you had to start over, slowly dialing until the picture stopped rolling. Watching TV together meant agreeing on one program and sticking with it for the night. Changing the channel too quickly could make the picture roll or the sound crackle. Some families had TVs with dials that wore smooth from constant use. It was physical interaction with your entertainment that is almost gone today. The convenience of a remote would have seemed like a luxury, but in the 1970s, no one missed what they had never known. The ingredient list on a can of Mountain Dew once included something you could also find in flame retardants. Brominated vegetable oil was used since the 1920s to keep citrus flavoring from floating to the top of sodas. The compound contained bromine, a corrosive element that accumulates in human tissue. Studies tied chronic exposure to thyroid damage, memory loss, and reproductive harm. The EU banned BVO in 2008. Japan restricted it years earlier. The FDA flagged concerns in 1977, set temporary usage limits, and then let those limits stand for 47 years. PepsiCo quietly dropped BVO from Mountain Dew in 2020, but off-brand citrus sodas held on. The FDA did not formally ban it until July 2024. Lead-glazed ceramic candy dishes sat on coffee tables and dining room sideboards throughout the 1970s, holding peppermints, chocolates, and holiday treats guests reached for without hesitation. These dishes were beautiful, often hand-painted with intricate designs or finished with glossy coatings that made colors pop under lamplight. Families displayed them proudly because they looked elegant, the kind of heirloom meant to last generations. Grandmothers filled them every Christmas, and children knew exactly which dish held the best candies. What nobody understood was that the glaze creating those gorgeous finishes contained lead, a toxic metal that leached slowly into anything sugary placed inside. Every lemon drop, every piece of chocolate sitting for days absorbed traces of lead no one could see or taste. Over time, researchers connected decorative ceramics to dangerous exposure levels, especially in children who grabbed handfuls of sweets. Regulators eventually cracked down on lead glazes, banning them from any product meant to touch food. Families packed away beloved dishes, uncertain whether the beauty they treasured had quietly poisoned the treats served with such love. Partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening was the invisible ingredient that made everything in the cafeteria taste better, richer, and more satisfying than it had any right to be. Cooks used it for frying, baking, and greasing every pan that produced the foods children loved most. The shortening came in large containers beside industrial stoves, scooped out by the cupful and melted into recipes passed down through decades of school food service. Nobody questioned it because nobody knew there was anything to question. Trans fats extended shelf life, improved texture, and cost far less than butter or other alternatives. The cookies were flakier, the pie crusts more tender, and the fried foods crispier because of this single ingredient that touched nearly everything on the menu. But scientists discovered that trans fats raised bad cholesterol while lowering the good kind, creating a cardiovascular danger that lurked in every bite. When evidence became undeniable, regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils entirely. School kitchens had to reformulate everything, replacing the shortening that had defined cafeteria cooking for generations. The foods remain, but they taste different now. Rat catchers might sound like something from a medieval story, but they were a very real and important profession in American cities well into the early 20th century. Cities struggled constantly with rat infestations that spread disease, destroyed food supplies, and terrified residents. Rat catchers were paid by local governments or private businesses to hunt, trap, and poison rodents wherever they were found. Some carried small dogs trained to sniff out rats in warehouses, while others used simple traps and nets. The work was dirty, dangerous, and often carried a social stigma, but it was vital for public health. Rat catchers sometimes worked at night, crawling through alleys and sewers to keep populations under control. In return, they earned only modest wages and little recognition. What shocks us today is not only the idea of someone making a living chasing rats, but also how necessary it truly was. Before modern pest control companies and sanitation, entire cities relied on rat catchers to keep outbreaks at bay. Their work was a strange mix of bravery, desperation, and necessity, and it is hard to imagine urban life without them. In the 1980s, playgrounds were built with toughness in mind, not safety. Swings, monkey bars, and towering metal slides stood proudly above solid asphalt or concrete. When you fell, and every kid did, the impact left scraped knees, elbows, or sometimes even a trip to the hospital. But nobody thought twice about it. The blacktop surface doubled as a basketball court, so playgrounds were a mix of games, fights, and accidents waiting to happen. Metal slides baked in the sun until they could practically brand bare legs. Merry-go-rounds spun wildly, tossing kids onto the pavement while teachers looked on with little concern. Parents shrugged it off as part of growing up. Bruises, cuts, and even broken bones were considered the price of fun. Recess meant risk, and most kids went home proudly displaying battle scars as proof they had played hard. Today, soft padding, wood chips, or rubber mats cover playgrounds. Looking back, it is shocking that an entire generation was sent to play on what was basically a paved parking lot filled with steel equipment. Do you remember the sting of asphalt burns as you jumped off the swings at full speed? Disco floor tiles in homes brought the nightclub directly into suburban basements. Inspired by Saturday Night Fever, people installed light-up dance floors that glowed in multiple colors as music played. Families turned their rec rooms into mini-discos, complete with mirrored balls and loud stereos. Parents and kids alike danced under flashing lights, imagining they were at the hottest club in town. These installations were not cheap, but for those who could afford them, they became a status symbol of the era. Parties at houses with disco floors were legendary, with neighbors piling in to experience the spectacle. It was a fad that perfectly captured the spirit of the decade: fun, flashy, and over the top. Today, it seems absurd to turn your basement into a nightclub, but in the 1970s, it was considered the height of cool. Disco tiles in homes remain one of the wildest examples of how far people were willing to go to embrace a trend. Big hair with entire bottles of hairspray defined the 1980s look, and it was as impractical as it was unforgettable. Women and men alike teased, sprayed, and layered their hair into towering shapes that seemed to defy gravity. The bigger, the better was the motto, and the haze of aerosol hung in bedrooms and bathrooms like morning mist. Entire cans of hairspray disappeared in a single weekend, and the resulting styles were so stiff they could survive wind, rain, and sometimes even a nap. Teenagers spent hours in front of mirrors perfecting their wings or bang walls, turning school hallways into fashion runways. Rock bands added to the trend, with hair metal groups flaunting wild manes that looked more sculpted than natural. Parents chuckled, warning their kids that one spark could turn their heads into torches. Today, it seems absurd to use so much flammable spray for the sake of fashion, but in the 1980s, it was essential. The smell of hairspray and the memory of hair teased sky high remain some of the funniest symbols of the decade. Cigarette billboards near schools were once an everyday sight, and few thought twice about it. Bright cartoon-style ads loomed over sidewalks where children walked daily, making smoking look playful and exciting. Companies filled the billboards with friendly mascots, colorful lettering, and smiling faces that seemed closer to comic strips than serious health warnings. Kids waiting for the bus could not miss them, and many grew up associating smoking with fun rather than danger. For advertisers, it was a smart way to plant brand loyalty early, long before the children could even buy their first pack. Parents often complained, but with so few restrictions at the time, tobacco companies had free rein to place ads wherever they pleased. These billboards turned neighborhoods into playgrounds of persuasion, normalizing cigarettes for a whole generation. The fact that they towered so casually near elementary schools is shocking today, but back then it was considered clever marketing. It took years of public outcry and health campaigns before regulations finally banned the practice. Until then, those billboards stood as bright, smiling invitations to a lifelong habit. Cigarette TV Guide channel was a test of patience disguised as technology. Families sat in front of the television, waiting for the scrolling list of shows to cycle through. If you missed your channel, you had no choice but to wait again. The crawl moved slowly, teasing you with glimpses of what was playing, often broken up by commercials or previews. Planning an evening of television meant timing your glance perfectly or enduring several cycles just to find your show. Kids groaned, parents sighed, and yet everyone accepted it as normal. Today, with on-demand menus and instant searches, the idea of waiting minutes just to know what time a show aired is shocking. Back then, though, it felt modern, a step beyond flipping through paper TV guides. It turned watching television into a small ritual, a mix of frustration and anticipation. The crawl itself became background noise in living rooms, quietly shaping schedules for entire families. Looking back, it feels absurd, but also strangely comforting. It was slow, clunky, and often irritating, but it gave television a rhythm that no streaming service can replicate. Before 1975, not a single electrical outlet in your bathroom was required to have ground fault circuit interrupter protection. The outlets had 2 flat slots, no test button, no reset, and no ability to detect a lethal current leak. If a plugged-in hairdryer fell into a filled bathtub, nothing stood between the electricity and the person sitting in it. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association documented at least 95 bathtub electrocution deaths in the United States between 1979 and 1982. Hairdryers were responsible for 60% of those deaths, and kids under 5 had the highest mortality rate. The National Electrical Code did not mandate GFCI outlets in bathrooms until its 1975 edition, and many local jurisdictions took years to adopt the standard. The Electrical Safety Foundation later estimated that GFCI technology cut home electrocution deaths in half. Canned fruit swimming in heavy syrup was a cafeteria staple that made fruit feel like dessert, each spoonful glistening with sugary liquid that pooled at the bottom of the bowl. Peach halves, pear slices, and fruit cocktail arrived in industrial cans that lunch workers opened before portioning the contents into small dishes. The syrup was thick and sweet, the kind of liquid children instinctively drank after finishing the fruit itself. Schools served it proudly because it counted as a fruit serving, checking a nutritional box without requiring the expense of fresh produce. Parents assumed their children were eating something healthy because the word fruit appeared on the menu. But those heavy syrups contained enough added sugar to rival candy, turning what should have been a wholesome choice into something far less innocent. When regulators examined the sugar content hiding in school fruit servings, heavy syrup became an immediate target. Today, canned fruit in schools must be packed in water, natural juice, or light syrup containing a fraction of the sugar children once consumed without question. The fruit tastes different now, less like a treat and more like what it always should have been. Delivery boys might sound quaint, but for decades they were the messengers of life-changing news. Dressed in uniforms and often riding bicycles, these teenagers carried envelopes that could bring joy, sorrow, or urgent orders. Telegrams were used for everything from wedding announcements to death notices, making each delivery a moment of suspense for the family receiving it. Imagine being a young boy, tasked with knocking on doors and handing over words that might alter someone's life forever. They raced through city streets, weaving through traffic and battling weather to meet strict deadlines. Companies like Western Union employed armies of these boys, who became a common sight in both big cities and small towns. The job could be exhausting, and the emotional weight of the messages they delivered was enormous. For many, it was a first job, offering discipline and responsibility but very little pay. With the rise of telephones and eventually email, the need for telegrams and their delivery boys vanished. It is almost shocking to remember a time when important personal news depended on a teenager pedaling as fast as he could through the streets. Radio play. The 4th of July in the 1980s was a hands-on holiday for kids. Roadside stands popped up weeks before, selling fireworks directly to children without asking questions. Roman candles, bottle rockets, firecrackers, even M80s, all handed over to 10-year-olds with a smile. Parents gave kids money for fireworks the way they gave money for candy. Brown paper bags filled with explosives were carried home like prized treasures. Children set them off in driveways, alleys, and backyards, often with no adult supervision. Burns and close calls were part of the fun. The culture saw it as tradition. Fireworks were a rite of passage, something you learned by trial and error. If you lost your eyebrows or singed your fingers, that was part of the memory. Few questioned whether selling explosives to kids was wise. Today, strict age limits and regulations control fireworks sales. Looking back, it is startling how casually explosives were handed to children as if they were toys. Do you remember clutching a bag of bottle rockets, eager to light the fuse without a second thought? Beer ads featuring pregnant women might sound like a dark joke today, but in the 1970s it was a real selling point. Some companies ran campaigns for light beer that claimed it was so mild, so harmless, that even expectant mothers could enjoy a glass without worry. You would see smiling women with round bellies raising their bottles in toast, suggesting that drinking was part of a healthy social lifestyle. At the time, the science about alcohol and pregnancy was not as widely known, and advertisers used that gap in awareness to their advantage. They leaned into the idea that a lighter beer meant safer indulgence, turning it into a product for everyone at the table. Neighbors and friends might even have believed the message, treating these ads as reassurance that moderation was perfectly fine. Looking back, it is chilling to realize how casual the tone was, almost as if they were advertising orange juice or iced tea. These ads remind us just how different cultural standards were, and how profit often outweighed responsibility. What was framed as a lifestyle choice then now stands as one of the most shocking missteps in advertising history. Payphones were once everywhere, standing tall on city corners, inside malls, and outside gas stations. The metal booths with scratched glass doors were part of the daily scenery. People carried quarters in their pockets or purses just in case they needed to make a call, because having a phone on you at all times was unthinkable. If you ran out of coins, you made a collect call, hoping the person on the other end would accept the charges. The receivers were sticky, the keypads worn, and phone books hung by chains, heavy and outdated. In emergencies, finding a payphone was the only option, and people relied on them without question. Today, the very idea of hunting for a public phone in a crisis seems absurd when a smartphone is always within reach. What shocks people now is not just how common payphones were, but how much trust was placed in them. They were lifelines, scattered across neighborhoods like tiny anchors of security. Kids called home after school from payphones, travelers checked in from airports, and couples argued in booths under flickering streetlights. In the modern world, where they have nearly vanished, spotting one feels like discovering a relic. They remind us of a time when communication was slower, less private, and far less convenient. But somehow, people made it work. Before Kinder Joy hit American shelves in 2017, the original Kinder Surprise egg was straight-up contraband. Ferrero's hollow chocolate egg with a plastic toy sealed inside violated a 1938 law banning any candy containing a non-nutritive embedded object. Customs agents treated these eggs like smuggled goods. Between 2011 and 2013, border officials seized over 60,000 Kinder eggs, often confiscating them from families returning from European vacations. Individual fines could reach $2,500 per egg. The whole situation was absurd. A hollow chocolate treat beloved by millions of kids across 30 countries was classified under the same statute meant to keep broken glass out of food. Ferrero eventually spent years engineering a compliant version that split the toy and chocolate into separate sealed compartments, finally reaching American stores nearly 80 years after the law was written. Homemade raw egg ice cream was a treasured summer ritual in the 1970s, the kind of family activity that turned hot afternoons into something unforgettable. Parents cracked fresh eggs into the bowl, whisking them into rich custard that would become the creamiest ice cream anyone could imagine. Kids took turns cranking the wooden handle on the churn, counting minutes until they could taste the first frozen spoonful. The eggs gave the ice cream its velvet texture. That thick richness store-bought versions never matched. Nobody worried about bacteria because eggs came from trusted sources, sometimes backyard chickens or local farms where neighbors knew every hen by name. It felt wholesome and impossibly delicious. But salmonella hid inside some of those shells, invisible and undetectable by taste or smell. Families who had eaten raw egg desserts for generations found themselves reading headlines about outbreaks and urgent warnings. Regulations tightened, pasteurization became standard, and casual use of raw eggs in homemade desserts became something health codes no longer allowed. That ice cream tasted like summer, but it carries the memory of a risk nobody saw coming. Cigarette girls were a glamorous yet surprising feature of nightlife in theaters, nightclubs, and casinos during the early to mid-20th century. Young women dressed in stylish uniforms or evening gowns would walk between tables carrying trays strapped around their necks, offering single cigarettes, cigars, or even candy to patrons. They were part of the atmosphere, combining charm, beauty, and salesmanship into one package. For many women, it was one of the few jobs where they could earn decent tips while being part of a glamorous environment. But it also came with risks, from dealing with drunken customers to being constantly surrounded by smoke. Some venues used cigarette girls as marketing tools, encouraging them to chat and laugh with men to increase sales. By today's standards, the job feels shocking because it combined elements of service, advertising, and performance in a way that seems exploitative. As smoking regulations increased and attitudes towards cigarettes shifted, the role disappeared entirely. Yet in its time, the cigarette girl was a symbol of nightlife culture, remembered for the way she brought both elegance and commerce to every evening out. Every corner store in the 1980s had boxes of candy cigarettes on the shelf. White sugar sticks with red tips, they were sold to children as a treat that mimicked the look of real cigarettes. Kids bought them with pocket change and strutted around pretending to smoke. The candy came in boxes designed to look like real cigarette brands, complete with logos and packaging styles. Children tapped the boxes against their hands, pulled out the sticks, and puffed imaginary smoke clouds at each other. It was marketed as innocent fun, but clearly trained kids to copy adult habits. Parents thought it was harmless, even cute. Some even laughed when their children posed with candy between their lips. The connection between candy and cigarettes was obvious, but the culture ignored it. Today, the idea of selling candy that imitates cigarettes to children would cause outrage. Looking back, it is wild that entire generations grew up practicing smoking with sugar sticks. Do you remember tearing open a box and pretending to be just like the adults around you? Were one of the most playful and surprising home decor fads of the 1970s. Ordinary phones were not enough anymore. People wanted something that matched the mood of the decade, something bold and loud even when it just sat on the table. Suddenly, phones were shaped like giant pairs of lips, Mickey Mouse standing tall with the receiver in his hand, or even footballs that rang with the same shrill tone but looked like a piece of pop art. Every call became a little event, with guests laughing when they noticed the odd design and kids begging to answer just for the thrill of holding a cartoon character to their ear. These phones were more expensive than standard models, but families splurged because they were conversation pieces that made a statement. They fit perfectly with a culture that wanted every corner of the home to feel unique and expressive. Parents thought they were fun. Teenagers used them as status symbols, and children adored them as toys they were actually allowed to use. The novelty phone craze turned a dull utility into something fashionable, even glamorous, and for a few years it seemed like every household had at least one. Looking back today, it is almost shocking how much people were willing to spend just to have Mickey Mouse hold their phone for them. But in the 1970s, when style mattered as much as function, a novelty telephone was more than a fad. It was proof that even the smallest part of daily life could be made colorful, silly, and unforgettable. Pet scratch and sniff stickers were a schoolyard sensation that seems absurd now, but was completely normal in the 1980s. Teachers handed them out as rewards, and kids eagerly pressed them to their noses to catch scents of pizza, popcorn, bubblegum, or even gasoline. Collectors filled albums with pages of stickers, trading duplicates like baseball cards. Some smelled sweet, others strange, and the fun was in discovering which was which. Sticker clubs popped up, where kids swapped their rarest scents like secret treasures. Some stickers smelled so weird, like rubber tires or skunk, that they became jokes everyone wanted to try. Entire afternoons were spent flipping through albums, each page a gallery of scents and colors. Parents laughed at the idea of children obsessing over smelly pieces of paper, but the craze was unstoppable. Stickers with bizarre scents became the most sought after, making kids feel like they owned treasures. Looking back, it is funny to realize how many children spent hours huffing scratch and sniff paper, but at the time, it was one of the highlights of childhood. Car ads minimizing safety were another staple of the 1970s, and they glorified speed above all else. Commercials showcased vehicles tearing down highways, drifting around corners, and racing through city streets. Seatbelts and crash risks were never mentioned. Instead, the focus was on horsepower, handling, and a carefree lifestyle. The faster the car, the more desirable it seemed, with young men often portrayed as heroes behind the wheel. Even when laws about seatbelt use began emerging, advertisers downplayed safety features as boring or unnecessary. The thrill of danger was part of the appeal, and the ads leaned into it heavily. For teens watching, it sent a clear message. Driving was about excitement, not responsibility. Parents worried, but companies pushed forward, knowing speed sold better than caution. Looking back, the lack of concern for safety feels reckless, especially compared to modern standards. These commercials remind us how long it took for responsibility to catch up with style. Dial-up internet was not just slow, it was an entire event. You would sit at the family computer, usually tucked in a corner or in the living room, and click the little connection button. Then came that unforgettable screeching sound, a chaotic mix of static, beeps, and robotic tones that signaled your house was connecting to the online world. It felt like technology straight out of a science fiction movie. Yet, it was painfully slow. Minutes could pass just to load a single email, and images appeared one row of pixels at a time. If someone picked up the house phone while you were online, the connection would crash instantly, forcing you to start all over. Families often had strict computer schedules to decide who got internet time because everyone wanted to chat on instant messenger or play basic online games. Kids had to beg parents for just 5 more minutes, while parents grew impatient waiting to make a phone call. It was frustrating, clunky, and completely normal for the time. What makes it shocking today is how much patience it required compared to the instant access of modern high-speed internet. Waiting for a page to load taught you endurance, and that screeching dial-up tone became a soundtrack to the decade. To this day, people who lived through it can recognize it instantly, almost like a secret code of the 90s. Looking back, it feels almost impossible that we thought it was cutting-edge technology. Insulation wrapped around the pipes behind it worked on a different timeline. Asbestos lagging, a thick wrapping of woven asbestos cloth bonded with adhesive, was standard insulation for hot water pipes from the 1930s through the late 70s. In the bathroom, it covered every pipe running to the tub, the shower, and the sink. As the material aged, it became friable, crumbling at the slightest touch. A plumber tightening a valve behind the toilet could disturb it without knowing. The EPA banned certain asbestos pipe insulation in 1975, but material already installed was left in place. A study from the National Institutes of Health found that plumbers and pipe fitters had 10 times the rate of pleural thickening compared to telephone workers, a direct marker of asbestos exposure. The Department of Labor classified plumbers among the 4 highest-risk occupations for mesothelioma. The pipes in a 1970s bathroom were wrapped in a material that could take 30 to 50 years to show what it had done. In 1960, the FDA approved Obitrol, a capsule containing a mixture of amphetamine salts, including methamphetamine, as a prescription treatment for obesity. Doctors handed it to housewives the way they handed out aspirin. But the real madness was the rainbow pills. Patients walked into specialized obesity clinics and left with a personalized cocktail of brightly colored capsules, amphetamines to kill the appetite, thyroid hormone to accelerate metabolism, digitalis to increase heart rate, barbiturates to offset the jitters, and laxatives to flush everything through. One dispensing diet doctor paid $71 for 100,000 amphetamine tablets and sold them for $12,000. By 1962, American pharmaceutical companies were producing 8 billion amphetamine tablets per year. The weight came off. So did years of cardiac health. The Controlled Substances Act of 1971 finally slowed the pipeline, but not before an entire generation of women had been chemically wired to a scale. A human alarm clock, often called the knocker-up, is one of the strangest jobs from the past and almost feels like a storybook invention. Before affordable alarm clocks became common, people in cities actually paid workers to wake them up for work each morning. Armed with long sticks or canes, knocker-ups would tap on upstairs windows until the paying customer stirred awake. Some used pea shooters to knock on the glass from the street below, while others walked entire neighborhoods making sure dozens of people were on time for work at the mill or factory. Imagine relying on a stranger every day to make sure you did not oversleep and lose your job. It was a job built entirely on trust, and these workers often had to rise hours earlier than everyone else just to make their rounds. For years, this unusual profession kept industrial towns running on schedule. But once alarm clocks became affordable and reliable, the knocker-up disappeared almost overnight. Looking back, it is almost shocking that waking people up was once an actual paid occupation. It shows just how inventive people could be when faced with everyday needs before modern technology stepped in. In the 1980s, parents often left kids home alone overnight without hesitation. A 12-year-old was considered responsible enough to babysit siblings, cook basic meals, and lock up the house. Adults went to parties, overnight trips, or late shifts while kids held down the fort. The rules were simple. Do not open the door, answer the phone only if you know who it is, and call a neighbor if something serious happens. Pizza delivery filled the dinner gap, and television kept kids occupied into the night. For children, being left in charge felt like a milestone of maturity. Risks were real, fires, injuries, or break-ins, but parents trusted their kids in ways that would be unthinkable today. Communities felt safer, and independence was valued more highly. Most kids wore their responsibility like a badge of honor. Today, leaving a child alone overnight can result in legal consequences. Looking back, it is astonishing how normal it was to see preteens babysitting entire households. Do you remember the thrill of being the one in charge, even if you were only 12? Head kits for kids might sound like the setup to a horror movie, but in the 1970s, they were actually marketed as toys. These bizarre mail-order kits promised that children could create their very own authentic shrunken heads at home by carving apples, drying them out, and decorating them with grotesque faces. Parents bought them because they were cheap and crafty, but kids loved them because they were just creepy enough to feel rebellious. Imagine opening the box to find the tools, instructions, and paint needed to turn ordinary fruit into something that looked like it belonged in a haunted house. It was strange, unsettling, and completely normal for its time. The popularity of these kits showed how different attitudes were back then toward what was appropriate for children. In hindsight, it is shocking that parents encouraged their kids to spend afternoons making decayed-looking heads for fun, but at the time, it was advertised as creative play. Friends would compare their shrunken apple heads like trophies, showing off whose looked scariest or most realistic. While it might seem dark now, back then it was simply another quirky 1970s fad that got kids off the couch and into hands-on entertainment. Mixtapes for every emotion were the love letters and diaries of the 1980s, painstakingly crafted one song at a time. With nothing but a blank cassette and hours of patience, teens sat by their radios waiting for just the right track to come on. The record button was always ready, though it was almost impossible to avoid the DJ talking over the intro or outro. Still, each mixtape was a masterpiece of effort, whether it was for a crush, a best friend, or just the soundtrack to your own moody afternoon. People poured their hearts into arranging songs in the perfect order, hoping the listener would notice the thought behind each track. Kids traded them, couples bonded over them, and sometimes friendships ended because someone reused a tape that was too important. Parents were baffled by the obsession, but for teenagers, it was the truest form of communication. Today, it is funny to think about how much energy went into pressing buttons on a tape deck, but at the time, mixtapes carried weight. They were proof that music could say what words could not, and they remain one of the most unforgettable relics of 1980s youth culture. Novelty phones turned every phone call into a comedy skit. Instead of plain beige or black telephones, the 1980s offered designs shaped like giant red lips, cartoon characters like Garfield, or even sports equipment. Kids begged their parents for them, and families proudly displayed them as if they were art pieces. Picking up a Garfield phone meant the sleepy cat lifted the receiver from his back, while the lips looked like they were whispering secrets whenever you made a call. The sound quality was terrible, the size was clunky, and cords tangled constantly. But none of that mattered. Friends giggled when they saw them, and answering the phone became a small performance. Parents might have rolled their eyes, but they often caved in because these phones made their kids so happy. Looking back now, it feels absurd that people paid extra money for a phone that looked like a cartoon, but it was exactly the kind of playful extravagance that defined the decade. They remind us that in the 1980s, even the most ordinary objects were expected to be bold, colorful, and funny. Every copper pipe joint in a 1970s bathroom was sealed with solder that contained up to 50% lead by weight. The plumber melted it with a torch, smoothed it with a rag, and moved to the next fitting. That solder sat in direct contact with the water flowing to your sink, your bathtub, and your shower head, leaching lead into every drop that passed through. Hot water accelerated the process, which meant the shower and the bath were the worst exposure points in the house. For children, even low concentrations of lead in water were linked to developmental delays, learning disabilities, and behavioral problems. Congress did not ban lead solder in residential plumbing until 1986 through an amendment to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Even then, the law defined lead-free as up to 8% lead content in fittings. That threshold was not reduced to 0.25% until 2011. For over a decade after the ban, the plumbing industry was still allowed to install fittings that leached lead into your family's water. Lines for home phones were a mix of convenience and curiosity. Instead of having a private phone line, you shared it with neighbors. When you picked up the receiver, you might hear someone else already talking. You had to wait your turn or politely ask to use the line. It was easy to overhear bits of conversation, and some people listened longer than they should have. Sometimes you would pick up the phone quietly just to hear the gossip. Kids learned which ring pattern belonged to their house and ran to answer. Politeness varied. Some neighbors kept calls short, others seemed to settle in for hours. If there was an emergency, people would usually hang up immediately to give you the line. The shared connection often led to friendships or feuds, depending on who was on the other end. Rings were coded, 2 short rings for one household, 1 long ring for another. Sometimes you learned more about your neighbors than you ever intended to. Privacy was a luxury, but the shared connection felt oddly communal. Today, with everyone carrying a private phone, the idea of sharing a line with strangers would be unthinkable. Mercury thermometer was the most trusted instrument in your mother's medicine cabinet. A thin glass tube filled with liquid mercury that she slid under your tongue and held there for 3 minutes while you tried not to bite down. When the glass cracked, and it always did, tiny silver beads of elemental mercury scattered across the bathroom floor. Kids chased them with their fingers, pushing the droplets together into larger blobs, fascinated by the way the liquid metal moved. Nobody called poison control. Mercury vapor, invisible and odorless, drifted upward from the tile while the family tried to sweep the beads into a dustpan. A single broken thermometer contains enough mercury to contaminate a small room above safe exposure limits. At least 13 states have since banned mercury thermometers entirely. Raw milk, unheated, unfiltered, straight from the cow, was the only milk Americans knew before pasteurization became common in the early 20th century. It carried tuberculosis, typhoid, diphtheria, and scarlet fever. Pasteur's heating process changed everything, and by the mid-1920s, most states required it by law. Still, raw milk never fully vanished. The FDA banned its interstate sale in 1987, and 21 states prohibit it outright today. The rest allow it under restrictions ranging from farm gate sales to limited retail. The CDC has reported that unpasteurized dairy is 840 times more likely to cause foodborne illness than pasteurized milk. Between 1993 and 2012, regulators traced 127 outbreaks to raw dairy, sickening nearly 2,000 people. A vocal consumer movement keeps pushing for broader access. The FDA has not moved. Yellow number 1 and number 2 cake decorations made birthday celebrations in the 1970s glow with sunshine colors that seemed impossible to achieve naturally. Bakers relied on these synthetic dyes to create bright yellow frosting flowers and cheerful trimmings that popped against white buttercream. Children's cakes featured smiling suns and lemon-colored decorations that made every celebration feel warm. Parents trusted these colors because they appeared in everything from store-bought treats to bakery masterpieces. The yellows were stable, vibrant, and easy to work with, favorites among decorators wanting consistent results. What nobody questioned was what happened when those brilliant pigments entered the body over years of parties. Researchers eventually linked these dyes to allergic reactions and health concerns that raised alarm bells. Regulators banned both yellow number 1 and yellow number 2, forcing manufacturers to reformulate products relying on these colors for decades. The sunny decorations crowning countless cakes disappeared from approved ingredient lists. Different yellow dyes have taken their place, but the original shades defining 70s celebrations no longer exist in legal form. Film projectionists were once the unseen heroes of every movie theater. Long before digital projectors, showing a film meant wrestling with massive reels of celluloid that had to be threaded carefully through the machine. A projectionist needed steady hands, sharp eyes, and intense focus to keep the film running smoothly without tearing, burning, or skipping. The projection booth was hot, noisy, and filled with the smell of heated film and machinery. Projectionists worked in near isolation, carefully watching the reels spin as audiences below laughed, cried, and gasped at the story unfolding on screen. They were responsible for switching reels seamlessly at exactly the right moment, or else the movie would stop in mid-scene and draw angry boos from the crowd. Fires were a constant risk too, because old film stock was extremely flammable, making the job dangerous as well as stressful. Yet despite the pressure, many projectionists took pride in their craft, seeing themselves as guardians of the movie-going experience. Once digital projectors arrived, the profession nearly disappeared overnight. What shocks us now is realizing how much skill and responsibility was once required just to show a film, something we barely think about anymore when a movie starts playing. Roller skating waitresses were a mix of entertainment and danger that defined drive-ins in the 1970s. Servers delivered burgers, fries, and milkshakes on skates, weaving between cars with trays balanced in their hands. For customers, it added excitement to the dining experience, turning a simple meal into a show. For the waitresses, it was hard work that required balance, speed, and a lot of courage. Restaurants advertised it as part of their charm, and many families chose specific drive-ins just to see the skating servers in action. Accidents happened, of course, spilled drinks, dropped plates, and the occasional fall. But that was part of the spectacle. Roller skating waitresses fit perfectly with the decades' love of novelty and performance. Today, it seems risky to combine fast food with skates, but in the 1970s, it was considered cutting edge. They captured the energy of the era and remain one of its most colorful and surprising fads. Knit-bearing beepers or pagers gave people a sense of importance. Professionals clipped them to their belts, and teenagers flashed them like status symbols. A simple beep or a string of numbers meant someone needed you, and you had to find a phone to respond. Codes developed among friends and couples, numbers that stood in for words, a secret language buzzing on tiny screens. Parents used them to keep tabs on kids, while doctors and business people depended on them for emergencies. Compared to smartphones, pagers were limited, But in the 90s, they represented connection and modernity. You were reachable, but only halfway. What shocks people today is how exciting that felt, being notified but still having to track down a payphone to reply. Pagers were not just gadgets, they were part of an identity. They made teenagers feel grown up and gave professionals a visible badge of responsibility. In hindsight, the clunky plastic devices seem laughable, but at the time, they were cutting edge. They symbolized a world in transition, caught between old-fashioned communication and the mobile future just around the corner. Her mother's obstetrician may have told her to smoke. That is not an exaggeration. Throughout the 1960s, doctors advised pregnant women that a cigarette could calm their nerves, ease nausea, and help control excessive weight gain. Tobacco companies ran advertisements featuring physicians in white coats endorsing specific brands, and medical journals accepted full-page ads from cigarette manufacturers without hesitation. The 1964 Surgeon General's report linked smoking to lung cancer, but said almost nothing about pregnancy. Hospitals had ashtrays in maternity wards. Nurses smoked at their stations. Millions of women smoked through all 9 months because the person they trusted most, their doctor, never told them to stop. Red dye number 2 colored your candy, brightened your soda, and made your breakfast cereal look appetizing. Through the 1960s and into the mid-70s, this synthetic dye called amaranth showed up in everything from Kool-Aid to Hostess snack cakes to pet food. Products worth over $10 million a year contained it. A Soviet study linked amaranth to cancer in rats. American researchers could not conclusively replicate the results, but the FDA was boxed in by its own rules. The Delaney Clause, a 1958 amendment to the Food Additives Act, required any additive shown to cause cancer in animals to be pulled. No cost-benefit analysis, no exceptions. In January 1976, the FDA officially banned red dye number 2. Candy manufacturers panicked ahead of Valentine's Day, afraid their red sweets would rot on shelves. Mars pulled red M&Ms entirely, not because they contained the dye, but because the company worried about consumer confusion. Red M&Ms did not return for over a decade. Brominated vegetable oil citrus sherbet was a summer staple in the 1970s, offering tangy, refreshing treats that cooled down hot afternoons and made gatherings feel complete. The sherbet came in bright orange, lemon, and lime flavors that tasted almost more citrus than real fruit, with smooth texture melting perfectly on the tongue. Kids loved scooping it into bowls or pressing it between cookies to make sandwiches dripping down their fingers. What made those flavors stay evenly distributed, so consistently vibrant, was brominated vegetable oil. This emulsifier kept citrus flavoring from separating, ensuring every bite delivered the same tangy punch. Families trusted it because it appeared in countless products without warning labels, but bromine accumulates in the body over time, and researchers linked it to thyroid problems and neurological issues that could not be ignored. States began banning brominated vegetable oil, forcing manufacturers to reformulate recipes unchanged for decades. The sherbet still exists, but the version families remember contains something modern regulations refuse to allow. That refreshing sweetness carries a story of convenience outweighing caution. The ice delivery man was a common sight on American streets before refrigerators became affordable. Every day he would haul heavy blocks of ice, often weighing 50 or more pounds, from his truck into kitchens where they were placed into ice boxes to keep food cool. Children would sometimes follow the wagon to beg for chips of ice on hot days, treating it like a rare sweet. The work was grueling, with men carrying dripping blocks on their backs in all kinds of weather. They relied on leather pads and tongs to handle the weight, but injuries and sore muscles were constant companions. Ice delivery required strict schedules because families depended on fresh ice before the last block melted away. The sound of clinking tongs and melting drips was once part of every summer morning. With the rise of electric refrigerators in the mid-20th century, the ice delivery business collapsed almost overnight. Today, it seems shocking that so much effort was spent transporting and carrying something as simple as ice. But at the time, the Iceman was essential, keeping food safe and homes running smoothly with each heavy delivery. Talking Teddy Ruxpin dolls were the high-tech toys that managed to be both magical and unsettling. This cuddly bear had a cassette player in its back, and when you inserted a tape, its eyes and mouth moved as it read stories out loud. Kids were amazed, crowding around Teddy as if he were alive, hanging on every word of his adventures. Parents bought them as educational tools, believing the interactive reading experience would help kids learn. But there was something undeniably creepy about a stuffed animal that blinked and talked with a mechanical voice. For some children, Teddy was a beloved bedtime companion, while for others, he was a nightmare waiting to happen. Malfunctions made it even funnier in hindsight. Sometimes Teddy's batteries would die mid-sentence, leaving him with a slow, haunting drawl. Despite the quirks, Teddy Ruxpin became a must-have toy, showing just how far the 1980s would go to make technology part of childhood. Today, looking back at that animatronic bear, it is hard not to laugh at how seriously we took him. Manufacturers sold joint compound and spackling paste containing chrysotile asbestos throughout the 1960s and 70s. It was used to finish drywall seams, patch cracks, and smooth bathroom walls before painting. The product went on wet and was sanded smooth once dry, and the sanding was the problem. Each pass of the sandpaper launched a fine cloud of dust loaded with asbestos fibers into the air. In a bathroom, where the space was small and the door was usually closed, fiber concentrations could spike within minutes. The CPSC banned asbestos in spackling compounds and joint compound in 1977, but the material already applied to millions of bathroom walls was not affected by the rule. Homeowners who patched, sanded, or refinished their own bathroom walls through the 80s and 90s had no idea what they were inhaling. The compound looked like ordinary plaster dust. It was not. Before, ashtrays in airplanes and buses were a standard feature, built right into the armrests. Even if you were not a smoker, they were there, waiting to be flipped open with a little metal click. On airplanes, the "no smoking" sign was just something that lit up during takeoff and landing. Once you were in the air, lighting up was allowed in the designated rows. The air was filtered, but you could still smell the smoke drifting back through the cabin. Bus windows opened just enough to let out a wisp of cigarette smoke while the ashtrays filled up with gray powder. Some passengers carried their own lighters and packs, making smoking mid-trip a kind of ritual. The smell would cling to the seats and curtains long after the trip was over. In buses, the ashtrays often rattled in their slots when the vehicle hit a bump. Flight attendants and bus drivers moved through the haze as if it were invisible. No one thought to complain. It was simply the way travel worked. Some ashtrays had burn marks from cigarettes that had been stubbed out too hard. It was all so routine that no one thought about the idea of traveling without them. Passengers chatted, read newspapers, and smoked as if the miles rolled by on a moving lounge. Now, seeing an ashtray in a seat would be like spotting an artifact from another time. No, every one of those things sat on a store shelf, hung from a pegboard, or rolled through a schoolyard without a single warning label between them. The rules caught up, the shelves cleared out, and an entire decade of normal quietly became unthinkable. If this brought back a decade you thought you had forgotten, share it with someone who grew up in the middle of it. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time.